Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, welcome to the program.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing well. I'm just trying to put it all together and trying to figure out if the world is better off today than it was a couple days ago, before the important people of the world got together and, laid out the plans for us all. But I did pay a fair amount of attention, but I couldn't quite figure out how I'm better off. I guess since my position is that we should have diplomacy and we should talk to each other, I don't know whether this fits the category, because I don't think there was any serious diplomacy going on. I think there was grandstanding and politicking going on and trying to get an edge, and occasionally they would mention an issue. But, the only thing that I ever attended, I came close to this, I attended a long time ago, I think it was even in the 70s, was a social event for the IMF. And all I remember is it was totally directed towards social, it was drinking and all this other stuff. So it's a social event for some of the individuals, and there's a lot of staff, there's a lot of money goes into that. If you just looked at the money spent, you might be able to make a case, say, really, should these people be traveling around the world, and they flew big airplanes and contributed to global warming and all these kind of things. But I don't really feel like a lot of good things happened. We might just talk a little bit about the economic issues, because the markets did observe what was going on, especially on the trade issues. But I don't think anything has been solved. I think in some ways, for me, it shows how precarious things are. While little things seem to be more important than anything else. Did he shake hands with him? And what did he say to him? And who was here? And this sort of thing. So what do you think about these whole things? These meetings like this G20? Do you think it comes out? Do you think that this one would be more good or more bad?
Well, probably I would say missed opportunity, because as you rightly point out, a lot of the substantive things are actually fluff. And also the ones that are substantive are things that we wouldn't approve of, the sort of the elites gathering and turning the knobs and deciding what trade should be free and what shouldn't. But, I think the value of these probably is in the person-to-person diplomacy. And unfortunately, President Trump, after all week, the week leading up to the summit, saying, yeah, we're going to sit down with Putin, we're going to have a talk, finally at the last minute put out a tweet saying, oh, well, there's this little skirmish in the Sea of Azov, so we're going to cancel the whole thing. That's a missed opportunity.
They asked me that on TV, and I guess I was a little bit flippant. I said, it sort of sounds like high school. I'll talk to you. Oh, no, I'm not going to talk to you now. But we're not supposed to be in the business of being flippant, I guess. But that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I was also interested in the market reaction to it, and it had to do when Trump met with the Chinese leader. All of a sudden, nothing came out immediately, but a little bit later, then China reported, oh, we've just suspended adding any new tariffs on for 90 days. And the markets loved it, at least in segments, and the timing. I don't think anything permanent was changed by this, but it was canceled, and they were going to call it a holiday. No more. China wouldn't put on sanctions, and we wouldn't put on sanctions. But all that is just so misdirected that they create so many problems, and the sanctions and tariffs have been going on for years, and Trump threatens with more, and it just goes on and on. And I keep thinking, what did this make me think of when I heard that these tariffs weren't going to be, there was going to be a postponement on it, and the markets loved it. And I said, it's sort of like, if things are bad and you're all upset and you start hitting yourself on the head with a hammer, the saying goes, well, why are you doing this? Well, it feels so good when I quit. So they pretended they were going to quit for 90 days, and And the markets, responded tremendously. The Dow went up over 450 points. I imagine by now it's corrected itself because the small stocks didn't respond and the bond prices, went down, and that meant interest rates were going up. So I don't think that 90 days, even Goldman Sachs's, forget it, which I found interesting. I'll have to study that a little bit. But Goldman Sachs comes along and said, there's only a 20% chance that this is a breakthrough in moving away from this competition and who gets to put who's the last one to put on a tariff. So I think that we can't talk ourselves into saying, well, that was an economic breakthrough. I think it was just another economic guesswork then that a lot of people jumped at and thought, they always anticipate, what will it do to the markets? And they respond, oh, I think they're going to go up, and people had shorted the market, and that causes people to cover their shorts, and all of a sudden you see a spike. But I wouldn't be surprised if the day ends and the stocks aren't up that much high.
Yeah, there may not be a long-term economic, but I think in terms of visuals, though, the fact that Xi and Trump sat down, the pictures of them having a dinner with, the whole thing, the media here, of course, would never portray Trump as being able to hold his own at a meeting like this, that he's somehow going to throw his shoes or start tweeting or doing something weird. And they acted with surprise that he carried himself very well. Okay, it's not the best agreement in the world, but at least they talked and they realized face to face that, okay, let's do something different. I think maybe if you look for a silver lining, that's it.
Well, we argue the case for diplomacy. Try it, even with those individuals you don't agree with, and things will work out better. And certainly Ronald Reagan took that position and was able to achieve something on the international front by willingness to talk to the Russians. But the other thing that made the news that I thought was of interest was how MBS got some of attention.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much doubt in the world that he was very much involved in Khashoggi's death, and evidently they're finding emails connected where he maybe 10 or 15 times. So but there's some people now who still think they should treat him with kid gloves, and this included just about everybody. Trump has not been willing to criticize him. We have to protect our interests with the Saudis, but I at least was a little bit surprised that he had a friendly conversation, at least, or exchange with Putin.
Yeah, I think that was interesting. I don't know. To me, the visuals were funny. It looked political. Here's all along Putin willing to meet Trump. Let's meet. And Trump at the last minute says, no, I'm not going to talk to you, like you said. And it almost felt like Putin is walking in there because Trump was behind him. And Trump looked a little forlorn. And so Putin walks in and does a high five with Mohammed bin Salman, with Trump back there looking. It actually made Trump look weak in a way. It made him look weak. He's stuck in a corner while everyone else is cheering and meeting each other. So I don't think that was an accident on Putin's part.
There was a suggestion by a writer after the G20 finished was, maybe this was a place they could have talked about First Amendments and Assange, because that's an international problem. But we didn't hear anything about Assange.
Yeah, nothing at all. Another missed opportunity, I think. But there were a couple of other bright spots if we're going to praise some of the good things, some of the things that at least I like about Trump, which is that he doesn't like these kinds of things. He doesn't like sitting around with NATO leaders, sitting around with EU leaders, doing nothing but exercising his jaws. And there's the media portrayed it as a gaffe, but I think it was actually the real Trump that a lot of people are attracted to. They're all gathering them on stage for this big photo shoot that they all do, and he didn't realize the microphone was open. And he looked over to his aides and said, "Get me out of here." He just can't take it. He just walked off, and here's the poor Argentine president sitting here wondering, what do I do now? And finally, they had to usher Trump back on. But I think those are good instincts.
There are some problems excuse me, around the world. And in Europe, there's certainly a lot of problems. They have economic problems. They have EU problems. They have the Brexit deal that they're dealing with. And but they really didn't talk about that. That was exploded. That was ignored. And then when you think of what's happening in France right now, I mean, that sounds like it's a year ago we were looking. Oh, they have the problems with the migrants, even though we contributed to the problem with the wars in the Middle East. That's a long way off. We don't have to worry about that. We have the same problem, although the cause is not exactly the same. It isn't that, long term we had military interference, and we have a lot of interference in Central America, and sometimes we interfered with their natural tendency, but because the economy is so bad, we're facing the same problem here. But they can't discuss things like this because they really don't have a very good answer.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And the other, as we were looking for bright sides, the other thing we talked about just before the show is that the President Trump neglected, or he decided to not sign. He was the only country, the U.S. is the only country to not sign the statement on climate change at the G20, which of course, to a large degree, is just a government boondoggle that hurts business. And I think Trump recognized that. So, of course, it irritated the heck out of everyone else there, but he said, I'm not going to sign it. So the U.S. got a little carve out that we don't buy this. We're out of the Paris Treaty, and we don't do that. So, there's another little pat on the head for Trump.
The reason that Trump gave for not talking to Putin was the crisis, a bit of a crisis, in the Black Sea and Azov. And Trump says, as long as they're holding our these sailors from East Ukraine, well, I'm not going to talk to them until he returns. Which was way out of context of what the real truth is and how that all started. But he was very consistent on this. This is what he's been doing, and he's supporting this, which happens to be a lousy, foreign policy position. But it's also his excuse for not talking to Putin.
Well, as you wrote in your column today, this would have been his chance to say, hey, this is Obama's foreign policy, this whole thing, and he was a disaster, he was a loser, I'm going to start a new thing. And unfortunately, however, he's surrounded himself with neocon advisors, just got a new one at the State Department, and all they want is a new Cold War with Russia. Well, why? Because that's what pays the bills. If you're in part of the military-industrial complex, if you come from the think tanks, if you're dealing with, in Washington with policy, military-industrial complex, a new Cold War is very profitable. So that's definitely a missed opportunity.
I was looking for some hints that maybe somebody would suggest that free trade might be a good idea. Didn't hear anything about free trade, at least the way we look at it, that we should be moving away from sanctions and tariffs and all these things and having a commodity type standard of money that could be used throughout the world. I didn't see anything there that made me think that we or anybody else understand or are striving for a non-interventionist foreign policy. There was a fair amount of discussion and trying to position each country who's the kingpin. And there were some concessions that the United States didn't look quite as strong as they have in the past, and that China was handling themselves pretty well. And even the foreign minister for Russia, Lavrov, handles himself pretty well too. So I don't think we were hurt, by Trump going. He gave you a little bit of entertainment on what he did, and he said a couple good things. But being a philosophic person, looking always for which direction are we going? Are we moving toward more liberty and more, understanding of what property rights are and contract rights are, or moving away from that? Are we settling the disputes of the world and moving away from these conflicts? And of course, trade. For most of us is, very much involved in the militarism that goes on, that if you don't trade with people or if you fight over trade, you're more likely to fight with them. So unfortunately, I'm glad you came across a little bit more optimistic today, and that's fine. And I try to do that, but I'm looking for that nudge. I guess I could say, well, at least they went there. At least they pretended they were trying, and nobody socked anybody. Nobody took their shoes off and started banging a table.
Yeah, that would have been fun. Well, the thing is, here's the bottom line on it. The neocons are the isolationists, not the non-interventionists. And unfortunately, President Trump has surrounded himself with neocons. So they have pushed Trump into going there, and by wanting to punish everyone who doesn't toe the U.S. line, it's actually the U.S. that looks isolated. It's Trump in a corner, hanging his head while everyone else is bumping fists. So the isolationists, the neocons, they isolate us. Non-interventionists are all for engagement. And one other final note, we will be running our thank you to the donors and participants in our Giving Tuesday fundraising last week after tomorrow's program. So.
Very good. And I want to just follow up a little bit about the term isolation, because some people, when they hear us talk about not being involved, not getting involved in these international agreements, and trying to have more government sort these things out, they say you're just an isolationist, and which is absolutely wrong, because it's more opposite of that than anything. Because what we want free trade. We want people to travel. We don't want people using sanctions and aggression and militarism to threaten people. And that strength of a country and the power of a country depends on not on their goodness and what kind of a system they have, but also on their military might and how much power they have and how much authority they have over all these organizations. But isolationism is not what we're talking about. We're talking about, a world where you have much more trust in each other, where there is more trade. People cringe when they hear that. But I'll tell you what's going on now is not a movement toward free trade, and therefore there's a lot more talk about militarism. And the one theme in so much of what we've heard recently is, we got to be careful with Saudi Arabia, not to say, what we need to do is really help them in their killings that are going on in Yemen, but we have to worry about the weapons sales. There's weapons to be sold. There's the good jobs people have, and now that we have to move away from, because isolationism if you isolate yourself from the world, you might have more militarism. If you have more freedom, believe me, you don't doctor up freedom by saying what we have to have is more intervention overseas, more inflationism, more fighting, and more trade agreements around the world. We need just an agreement, bilateral agreements, to treat people fairly and properly. That is the road to peace and prosperity, not more authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is what is opposite of a free trade agreements. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.